Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Day 2 for some of you, or day 3. I hope the conference is going out good so far for everyone. Yeah? All right. Okay, to introduce our first keynote for today, actually doesn't need too much of introduction. He's quite popular in the Postgres community. He is the co-founder and also core team member of the Postgres Global Development Group. He started working on Postgres since 1996. So it's only fair that for a person who's been working and practicing Postgres since its very initiation and also has seen it evolve over these many number of years, that he talks about what lies ahead in this domain. So to talk about the future Postgres challenges, please welcome with a thundering round of applause, Bruce Momjian.
Thank you. It's an honor to be talking to you today. Though I've been to India many times, this is my first India Postgres conference. So I know it's crazy. I've enjoyed it tremendously. Talking to all of you and seeing the excitement here is always very inspiring. I will be talking about future Postgres challenges today. If you're a curious person, you can come guess why I'm wearing some of the things I'm wearing today. My wife has a plan for that. The other thing I wanted to bring up is it's wonderful to see Google Cloud as a Diamond sponsor. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about that today because obviously the cloud is increasingly important, and how those cloud vendors work with the community is obviously important to the health of Postgres. AWS has made incredible progress in the past couple of years, and I'll be talking about that as well. And of course, there are many other companies like EDB, my employer, and tons of others. I think one of the real strengths, and I'll be talking about this today, is the fact that even though many companies are competing for business with customers, the concept of working together in the community is something that they've embraced. And I know it's not easy. It's not a typical business relationship, but I think over time they start to see the value of working with the community. And having been doing this for 26 years, bringing more and more people into that Postgres family is incredibly important. So I'll be talking a little bit about it. I just wanted to welcome them. I've been waiting for Google Cloud to come, and I hope that they have a very fruitful involvement with the community. AWS, speaking after me, of course, has done that and has greatly improved in the past couple of years, and I'll be talking about that too because, again, we're talking about the future, and the future is not always like the past, and we always have to be adjusting and changing so that we maintain a healthy community. So what are we going to talk about today? First, I'm going to talk about how great Postgres is, right? The current status, all the wonderful things that we do as a community, and that's an easy part, right? But the next 3 parts are going to be hard. And they're going to be hard because nobody really wants to talk about challenges, right? Everyone says, everything's going to be wonderful, nothing bad's ever going to happen. Well, having done this for a long time, as a leader, one of your responsibilities is to look forward, is to look on the horizon. What dark clouds might be forming on the horizon coming toward you, right? The bad things may never come, and most of the things I'm talking about probably are never going to happen. But as a leader, one of your responsibilities is to make sure that you're prepared, because the more prepared you are in seeing bad things coming, the more likely you are to avoid them, or the more likely you are to be prepared to deal with those things and minimize the damage that those things can cause. Right? It's pretty obvious, right? A lot of us have very tight deadlines. People are always asking us to do things. But as leaders, we also have to take time out of the immediate problems that we have and look to the future, look for the important things. There's actually a whole leadership concept where they say people worry about the immediate needs, but they don't always worry about the important needs. What somebody needs you to do today might be very important. It might be an immediate need, but it might not be the most important thing you should do today. most important thing you should do to may not be immediate at all. And as an EDB employee for 17 years, one of the beauties is that I've been able to take the time not to have immediate needs, but to look for important needs and to make sure that community stays healthy. By the way, these slides are actually on my website right here. So there are 57 other presentations there. 58, I think, almost. I have some new ones coming up. And you can try the QR code there if you're curious. So let's talk about Postgres itself and how it's going. 35 plus years of development. I've been involved for 26 of 27 now of those years. We have 25 years of annual major releases. We are very reliable, surprisingly, at producing a major release every year around September, October. We have quarterly minor releases, which is handled by a tremendously capable team, and about 180 features in every release, which is really impressive, particularly for something as complicated as a database. It's amazing how that happens. And you know, I was in Brussels 3 weeks ago, and somebody asked me, they said, how do you remain, if you're traveling all the time, how do you remain so calm? Because there's so much pressure on what's happening here. And I said, you know, and this was actually about growing open source teams, and I said, I'm calm because I know that the other people involved in the community are incredibly reliable. They're incredibly dedicated, and they have the best interest of the community at heart. So when I travel, I have no idea what's going on in the community, right? I don't read the community email lists. If somebody texts me and asks me a question, I'll answer it, but that almost never happens. Everything happens very smoothly, and partially because as a leader, one of the things, if you are a person who doesn't trust the people under you, they're not going to be trustworthy because they're going to think you don't trust them. If you put a lot of confidence in those people, they'll be trustworthy. It's kind of a weird thing, but the more you rely on people and assume they're going to be trustworthy, the more trustworthy often they are. So I have a small piece in a huge group of people. And frankly, one of my goals is not to stand up here and talk to you, not to be the person who you are listening to, but to have somebody else up here. Because I haven't won if I'm the guy talking. I'm won if I've got one of you to get up here and talk. Honestly, that's where my goal is to get everyone in India and everyone around the world and all the companies to be the people who are up here talking about Postgres, and I can just sit in the back and relax. So again, it's kind of funny, but I don't normally share that, but I thought it would be interesting. Postgres has a BSD license that makes it very easy to flow among companies. They don't have to commit to a license. They don't have to worry about maybe having to share their changes if they want to modify it. I mean, we had Yugabytes here, we have Cockroach and Snowflake, and there's a ton of other offshoots. Obviously, Google Cloud has their product. Oracle, I think, is going to come up with something called Aries, which I was like, wow, now Oracle's coming out with a Postgres. Google has Alloy. So it's kind of interesting. These companies can create forks of Postgres. They don't have to worry about the license. And over time, they start to see the value of the community, and they get more involved, and they bring more engineering. But they don't have to. I think that's the key, that they don't have to walk into the relationship forced into getting involved. They voluntarily, over time, obviously get involved. And that's really exciting. I mean, Aurora has been around for a long time, right? It's a fork of Postgres. Greenplum, another one we saw yesterday in the lightning talks, right? So and what's really interesting, in almost all those cases, except for the Oracle one, I don't know about Aries yet, but in almost all those cases, those organizations have come back and say, we didn't have to share, but we want to share. We want to be part of the community. We want community involvement. We're not forced to do it, but we want to. We have a diverse leadership team, diverse geographically, culturally, multi-company. So again, very, very wide spread of groups. For example, we have, you can't have more than one company dominating, for example, the core team or whatever. So there's a lot of checks and balances so that people feel they can be involved in an objective way without somebody controlling what's happening. I'd love to say every open source project is really healthy and really balanced and really warm and inviting and treats everyone, regardless of what company they're from or where country they're from, as valuable members. That's not always true, but Postgres, I think, does a pretty good job. This is a great slide. It was actually done by somebody at EDB, and it shows all of the company contributions in Postgres 15. I mean, you just got to love that slide, right? I mean, and I'm sorry, I can't really read all the names, and we have some Indian companies in there and a lot of the sponsors we have here. But what this tells me is that I have a very distributed group of volunteers, and I'm not reliant on any one of them. Any one of them could go away, and the community would still be fine. Yeah, it would be hard to lose somebody, but you understand if we had one dominant company, it would be very hard. This is another great slide. It's sort of like the best hits. What's really interesting is because the development process of Postgres is distributed across geographies and companies, we're improving at the same time in multiple directions. Normally, a company can only improve in one direction at a time, but because we're not a company, we're a group of volunteers, effectively, we can improve in ease of use, in enterprise, in big data, and new workloads, all in the same release. And you see that when you look at the release notes. It's a huge spectrum of things that we're improving every year. Most loved database, 2020. I don't remember if we have new slides, but again, popularity is incredible, and I'd love to talk more about that, but because of time, I won't. Okay. I'm not going to take any questions in this because it's a keynote. I'm going to try and take some questions at the end, okay? So just kind of hold your questions. I'll try and finish maybe 5 minutes early so we can do that. Isn't that a great picture? I just kind of love that. So again, I said we're going to talk about good news, and that was all the good news of how wonderful Postgres is and how many companies we have. But there are some challenges. And again, as a leader, we want to be talking about, we want to look at possible challenges so we're prepared and so we can minimize any damage that those challenges may do to us, okay? Unfortunately, I'm not the only person. Everybody in the community is in some way looking for challenges. So, I may get up in the morning and have a chat from one of our committers or one of just our community members and say, this weird thing is happening in this one location. What should we do? Or I've already dealt with it and here how I handle it, right? So again, it's not just me. It's the entire team is focused on a project which has been around for, 35 years and may go another 35, right? or longer. It's kind of hard to say because, again, because of the flexibility of Postgres, it keeps meeting the needs of today's IT, and I expect that to even become more significant. In a way, Postgres, when we started in '96, was not as well, it did not offer the kind of unique capabilities to the market as it does now. In a way, Postgres has pulled ahead in innovation, and I do have a slide deck on my website about innovation, and we've pulled ahead in innovation, and the other relational databases have not, effectively. It's very hard to do what we're doing, and it's only possible because of that teamwork that I talked about. So let's talk about first challenges. Leadership disruption. Now, you would think that open source leadership was not important, but in some critical ways it is. I just picked two examples. Many of you are familiar with GIMP, which is the GNU Image Manipulation Program. It's used for GUIs. What you may not know is in the early 2000s, the developers abandoned the project. And what happened was that a new team came a couple months later and said, wow, this is really nice software, we should be working on it, and they restarted it. In fact, when I started with Postgres in 1996, it had left Berkeley, which was where it was originally developed, and there was one person from Berkeley who was maintaining it. And they didn't have a lot of time, and releases weren't coming out very often. So in a way, Postgres was an abandoned project, or almost abandoned. when myself and a group of other people, Mark Fournier, and then our leadership team as it grew over the subsequent years, really took that abandoned or near abandoned piece of software and took it to what it is today. So leadership isn't always there. It can leave, it can come back. The final bullet is the CentOS case, and I don't even know how to explain this except to say it sounds like a Shakespeare novel, Shakespeare play, because what happened in CentOS is that the CentOS project, unlike Postgres, did not have the kind of companies supporting it. So Red Hat came along and said, we'd like to support CentOS. We're going to give them resources and servers, and we'll help in their leadership. Well, over time, Red Hat became the dominant leadership in CentOS. And over time, as IBM bought Red Hat, the CentOS leadership decided to take CentOS in a direction away from where the majority of its users wanted it to go. I don't know how else to put it. And what we have now is Rocky Linux, which is a recreation of CentOS, right? So it's not, my point is it's not it's not guaranteed that leadership will always be there and will always represent the user base, right? And that's scary. Now again, as I said before, the Postgres community doesn't allow a majority of core team members from one company. And there are other checks and balances that we have in. But frankly, the checks and balances are not as important as continually having a vision of inclusiveness and openness to whoever wants to help us, no matter what company they're from. We don't want to be a project that thinks I'm the Red Hat team, I'm the EDB team working in Postgres, or I'm the AWS team working in Postgres. What we want to have is AWS employs me, EDB employs me, Fujitsu employs me, Google employs me, and they employ me to help the community, right? Where they're not there to win a battle, right? They're there to work together. And again, every company has to learn that. That's not natural for companies. And I'm incredibly proud to say that many of our companies have done that. And over time, they see what other companies, like I'm sure Google looks and say, oh, look what AWS did. They have a whole team that's working on Postgres. That's great. Maybe we should do that. Maybe there must be a business value to that, right? Same thing with EDB. Well, they see people who just work on the community, and that's great. So again, you can put checks and balances in place, but you always have to have an overall outlook for the community. Poor reputation. I'm going to give you a weird example here. I'm not how many sure of you remember there was a database called Interbase, which was from Borland way back in the 90s. And it got rebranded as Firebird, which was Firebird database. Very popular in the early 2000s. Very popular in Russia and very popular on Windows. So when I was originally starting with Postgres and traveling in the early 2000s, I would go to conferences and Firebird database would be there and we'd be there. And it wasn't clear really if Postgres was going to win or going to be growing, and maybe both of us would grow. We didn't know. Unfortunately, there was, when they got the code from Borland, there was a hardwired password in the Interbase code, and they brought it over to Firebird, and they didn't notice it, and they shipped a whole bunch of releases with this hardwired password in the binary. And when it was discovered, they quickly fixed it, but the damage was done, right? Because they had shown that they didn't really understand everything they were shipping, right? And this thing had slipped through. So that's the kind of thing that I'm always looking for dangers, right? That's the kind of thing, because you can lose, there's a story, it takes a lifetime to build a reputation, but you can lose it in 5 minutes, right? And we've seen too many cases of that, I think, in the past couple of years, where leaders have amazing reputations they've lost very quickly when things have been found out, right? So as a community, poor reputation is something we always have to be concerned about. We have to make sure our security flaws are handled. We have to make sure we don't have buggy releases. I remember Informix had some major releases where it was so buggy that each new release had new bugs, and you stopped upgrading because you wanted, I'd rather have the bugs I know about than the bugs in the new release that I don't know about. And if you ever get into that cycle, your software is kind of dead because you've lost confidence. Instability, poor performance, data corruption, right? People rely on Postgres to guard their data. So data corruption is a huge thing we have to be careful of. This one is kind of weird. It may not be an issue in India, but it is an issue to some extent in the United States. And there's some good news and bad news here. But the whole US patent system around software is very unclear. It's kind of unclear what's patentable and what's possible. There was a very interesting case a couple years ago where Oracle was suing Google over the Java patents, if you're familiar with that. Fortunately, the Supreme Court sided with Oracle, but even up until a couple years ago, it wasn't clear that an API was patentable or not. In fact, it's not, but it had never been decided. RAM bus, that's a crazy one where it was a patent for some RAM chips. And Rambus came to an international standards organization. They recommended a particular way of doing RAM, and the standards group accepted it. And then once it was accepted and deployed, Rambus said, by the way, we have a patent on that idea. And they extorted money or got money from all the that just, you know, again, like a Shakespearean play where somebody is able to come in and do that. Microsoft is incredibly supportive of Postgres now. They have a huge number of team members. I'll be speaking at CitusCon in mid-March. So again, really excited about Microsoft's involvement with Citus and the whole team there. But years ago, as a way of, I think, slowing Linux, they tried to assert patent rights on the file system, the file system that I think XT and NT was using. They had patents, so they were trying to prevent Linux from reading the file system, or particularly writing to the file system. I think you could read it, but the patent was trying to prevent people from writing it. Again, that's a case where to slow a competitor, they're using patents to, again, that's old Microsoft, but it is a case I cannot forget because it's probably the clearest one. There's something called patent trolls in the US who just try to extort money from everybody, crazy stuff. But there is some good news. There's something called the Open Invention Network, which is actually a member, Oracle's a member, Microsoft's a member, IBM is a member, where they want to give their patents to open source projects. So that is a very positive concept. Unified patents is, again, another process where people are trying to create a patent portfolio for open source. And finally, Cloudflare had something called Project Django, which is trying to find prior art for patents. So again, there is some good news here. It's a storm cloud kind of out on the horizon. We just kind of keep an eye on it. There's not a whole lot we can do, actually, in the United States. But again, we're hoping that laws will continue to support open source and its use of technology. Identity challenges. This is actually, you would think this would not be an issue, but who owns the domain name for Postgres? Who owns the website? Who owns the trademarks? We're actually in a trademark dispute with somebody currently who wants to register a Postgres trademark in Europe in a way the community doesn't think is a good idea. And we'll resolve it. But again, we have a separate team that does that. They're incredibly knowledgeable. But again, it's something, this is an area, for example, that if CentOS had realized what was going on, they could have perhaps prevented Red Hat from sort of taking the CentOS label and identity and moving it in a different direction. That's why they had to rebrand it as Rocky Linux, and now they have to go around and tell everybody, hey, CentOS, go use Rocky Linux, right? Really, just something we keep an eye on. This is a good one. Again, I alluded to it at the beginning, and I have some blog entries here at the bottom if you're interested. But when cloud became really popular, there was this concern that the cloud vendors were going to be so big and the use of open source was going to be so centered on the cloud vendors that nobody was going to realize that open source projects existed. Right? If you think of Postgres as only RDS Postgres, or Aurora Postgres, or Google, or Alloy DB, right? Do you know there's an open source project behind that, right? Now, fast forward a couple years, and we actually know the answer. What has happened is that all the cloud vendors are basically saying, we use Postgres, and here we are, and we're calling it Postgres, and it's coming from this community over here, and you want to talk to them, and they're really nice, and we're going to go help them, and we have all these engineers who are now working in that community, right? So that's a great ending, but at the time, they're like, what if the cloud vendors don't want to work with the community? What if they just want to take the software, and they don't want to invest, right? Again, early years, the cloud vendors didn't know what open source was. There's this community thing, like why would we invest millions of dollars sometimes in helping a community? We can just take the software and use it, right? I mean, no company is typically going to continually do things just because it's a good idea. They have to have some business value. But what we've seen is that companies, particularly cloud companies, which was not, EDB was always clear that we were going to work, and Fujitsu and all these others who have been around for a decade or two, very clear they were going to work with the community. Wasn't clear the cloud people were. But as we go forward, the concern that the service, that the infrastructure as a service relationship was going to eclipse or sort of block the community has not happened. The cloud vendors have always pretty much universally seen that the community is an added value to us. It's something we can give to our customers. We can show we're investing in their technology, so we know the technology is going to remain healthy, right? The open project's not going to starve. I mean, frankly, with all of the cloud vendors now involved, and I know Google's going to be doing a lot more in the years ahead, we have more resources than we've ever had, right? That's great. You know, I was just outside yesterday. We wanted to do a conference in Singapore. We couldn't find a hotel because of some funding reasons. And Google said, well, you know, maybe we can use our campus, right? And then we can have the open source we'll have the community conference in the Google campus. I was in Israel. We did it at the Tel Aviv, Israel, AWS offices. It's fantastic. We used the coffee machines. They brought in pizza. All the facilities were there. Great people, right? So it's really a great place to be. But again, was not clear early on that that was going to be invested cloud people were going to make. Okay, let's talk about competitive challenges. I've talked about project challenges. Let's talk about competitive challenges. One thing here, for example, Postgres is a relational database, okay? Oracle, MariaDB. But there are other types of databases like embedded and document and columnar and data warehouse specific databases, full text search, time. What if relational isn't as important anymore? Right? Now, I know we've been through the NoSQL time, and we kind of know the value of relational, but if you go back a couple of years, there was talk that relational is old. You don't need it anymore. This NoSQL thing is absolutely the way to go. Well, what people found was that NoSQL is a limited feature set. It's a limited feature set designed for scaling across multiple servers. But you lose so many features that unless you absolutely need to scale across multiple servers, you're more efficient using a relational system, particularly Postgres, because it has a lot of the non-relational features as well, like JSON, full text search, GIS. But again, was not always clear that relational was going to be relevant now, okay? What about forks of Postgres? We have a lot of them. I mentioned a bunch of them. That chart over there has a bunch of them. Is it possible for a fork of Postgres to be so popular that the community decreases? Maybe, right? This last example, I think, is one I want to talk about. How many people remember a compiler called EGCS? Anybody? Before everyone's time. Everyone's very young. Basically, what happened, and I don't even remember the years. Vibor, do you remember this? You don't even remember it. Okay. So GCC is the GNU compiler. And very early on, it was very static. It wasn't improving. So EGCS was a separate team that forked the compiler and added a whole bunch of enhancements. And what happened was, because the enhancements were so good, most of the people who were using GCC moved over to EGCS. And then the GCC people realized that everyone was leaving, so they decided to adopt the EGCS code and then become, so the code we're now using at GCC is actually the fork EGCS. So my point is that if you are not open to adoption, open to the needs of the community, they'll just take it and go with it. So again, that flexibility is important for a project. Again, decline of relational. Relational's been around for a long time. Could this change? Right now, I don't see it, but it's something to think about. Okay, so let's finish here, and then I'm going to take some questions. Okay. Let's look at technical challenges of Postgres. Now, you might have thought I was going to start with this. Because when you think of Postgres, you're thinking, oh, it doesn't have this feature, or it doesn't have that feature. But actually, the project challenges and the competitive challenges are much more serious than the feature challenges. The feature challenges we do all the time. We know how to do this. Yes, we'd love to have I'd love for this slide to be empty. But we're always going to have things we don't do. But in fact, I think the earlier challenges are the bigger ones in the long term. Okay. First one, write amplification. This is something we've had with Postgres very early on. The architectural design can cause updates to generate more activity, more I/O than other systems. And we've been sort of fighting this battle for a long time. Cleaning up dead rows and old versions of rows has become expensive. We have full page images to prevent torn pages. We have hint bits we often put in the write-ahead log. We have a freezing process that we need to do. And what's really interesting is that every year we do a little better, right? Robert Haas, I know, talked about vacuum yesterday, and I understand did a fantastic job. But the question is, do we keep incrementally improving vacuum and auto vacuum and the way that we do things, or do we go for a radical approach? Now, we did try a radical approach for a little bit with Z-heap. That actually, I guess, got too complicated, and I'm not sure it's being worked on. But again, this is something we continue to look at. We continue to try and decide, should we do something different? I don't know the answer. I really don't. And I think we may debate it for many years to come. Is it a technical challenge? Yeah. I think we're getting better every year. Vacuum's getting better. Cleanup's getting better. Index cleanup's getting very better. If you look at the release notes, you can see incremental improvements every year in this area. I will also say that our architecture has a lot of advantages. So we might fix these, but if we might end up with worse problems. So again, you have to balance it. Cluster and file encryption. This is something I've worked on for 5 years. Unfortunately, that has not been adopted by the community. I got as far as sort of a proof of concept patch set, but unfortunately, it's sort of a checkbox for financial institutions. There's a question of whether it actually adds real value or it's just something that auditors want. Right? Now that may be a sufficient reason to add it for some people, but for the community, auditors wanting something, it has to have actual value. And we do have a patch currently. I think Stephen Frost is working on a new patch to do this. I don't know where we are here. The only thing I can say is that my employer, EDB, got tired of the community waiting for it because so many customers wanted it. So they released a version of their proprietary product a couple weeks ago that had it. So I tried to get in the community, and I couldn't do it, and whether we can get this done or not, I don't know. I do have a URL there at the bottom, so I don't know. I can't. It's a challenge. It's a challenge, and I don't know what the future will hold. But EDB basically allowed me to use my time to try and get in the community, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't get enough interest. Horizontal scaling, this is a big one for me. I've also been working on it for 5 years. This is the concept that you can have Postgres on multiple servers and have like a coordinator there at the top, okay? And you send the query in, and it kind of, it's like sharding, except it's like partitioning, except the partitions are on different servers, okay? And again, we've made real good progress in this. Postgres 14 actually allows you to do some really powerful stuff. But currently, it's mostly read-only sharding. Where we really think we may need to go is write sharding, where we can have shared snapshots and do better at sort of prepared transactions, commits across multiple shards. So again, this is kind of a work in progress, but I'm feeling pretty positive about that. There are some other things that could cause us issues. What if C, the C language, Postgres is written in C? What if people stop learning C? They've already kind of stopped learning C, right? What if it becomes so old that people don't want to work on it anymore? It's an issue, right? Some people, can you rewrite Postgres in Java? Well, that's been tried. I think there was a version years ago that tried it. I don't think that's ever going to happen. Can you write it in Go or Rust? Or, we get these questions. And we have to be aware. Again, it's kind of on the horizon. It's not something imminent. People seem to still work with C just fine. But it may never always be that case. Some of the support libraries we use, like for XML, they may go obsolete. Some of the testing frameworks, we have to continue to upgrade our tool chain so that we're current with what people are using. And then finally, there's like dramatic changes in technology. So what if new architecture comes that's just so different that Postgres can't adapt to it? It's possible, right? In fact, what's really interesting is we've had, in my mind, two major changes that relate to database technology in the past, let's say, 10 years. One was SSDs. And SSDs dramatically changed the cost of random I/O compared to sequential I/O. The beautiful thing is the only thing Postgres had to do for that change was to allow random page costs to be set on individual table spaces. Because effectively, if you have a server and some table spaces are SSDs and some of them are magnetic, you want to have different random page costs on it too. How long did that take to do? It's probably a day, right? It was real easy. And the second one was even easier, virtual machines, which then became containers, which then became cloud and Kubernetes. We didn't really have to do anything. I can't think of a single thing we had to do to be ideally set up for those environments. Yes, there's a lot of tooling that had to be built around it, install scripts, and obviously architecture that integrated with Kubernetes, but the database server itself didn't change. And part of the reason for that is because, and I'm about to take some questions, the reason for that is because Postgres was always designed to be so minimal, so much reliant on the operating system, that there's really not a lot of custom requirements of we need this hardware, or we need this operating system call, or we're going to use raw devices, or we're going to do this fancy, we need this fancy and bootstrap code. It's actually really simple. So all of a sudden, when these rapid deployment requirements came up, we were done. We were good. Everything was done for us. We didn't have to worry. So again, hopefully we're always going to make these great decisions. That may not always be true. But again, if I look at that challenge, I'm pretty proud of how smoothly Postgres has moved into the environment, really to the point where it looks like we knew it was coming all the time. Of course, we didn't, but you get the idea. I'm sorry. So I have about 7 minutes to take questions. I don't know who has the microphone, but I'd be glad to take a question or two. Chris Travers, I got a question here. Maybe I finished too early, I'm sorry.
So you've talked a lot about project challenges and the fact that Postgres works really well, partly because we have a geographically, culturally, and in other ways diverse team. What do you think about the current challenges to the project where you're starting to see this effort at disentangling parts of the world economy from other parts of the world economy, with most countries in the world, including India, not really wanting to take a in all of that?
Right. So that's a great question, Chris. I'll tell you a story. I had to get, one of the reasons I've never been to a conference here is because I am normally in Russia in February. So again, you're probably alluding to some of the split that we've seen geographically. Russia usually asks me in September or August to be at the February event. So by the time India gets their date, it's too late. I've already committed. Obviously, I'm not in Russia and probably won't be for a long time. But the story I wanted to tell you is that the Russians came to me and said, can you speak at our conference? And I obviously was not able to travel to Russia, but I said I'd be glad to do it online. And I will be doing it, I think, online. They have one coming up in March. And in preparing for that, I've obviously kept an eye, because we have many community members in Russia. A lot of our technologies come from our Russian developers. Some of the innovation, particularly, has come from Russia. Hard to dispute that. And the reason I go to Russia several times a year before the war was to thank them and invest in those people. But I said, what am I going to say at this conference? Because obviously, if I just get up and talk about Postgres, there's really something I should address, you know. And I said, so what I did, I sort of thought about it, and I said, okay. And I didn't tell them I was going to do this, but I said, before I speak, I want to say something. I said, I know this is a very hard time for the Russian people, but I said also it's an even harder time for the Ukrainian people and Ukraine. But I said, I represent a project that does not honor political boundaries and political borders. And it is in that spirit that I speak to you today. But I said, also, I want to add that I am sad to say that it may be many years till I can come to Russia again to spend time with you. And the feedback I got from the organizers was that they really appreciated that, because I didn't say they had no problems in Russia, but I also didn't ignore the many larger problems that Ukraine had. But the point is that we have had some community members early on who said, oh, we shouldn't be working with the Russians. The software might be used in a military setting and so forth. And it's probably true. I mean, I know that Postgres is used in military settings all over the world. But I said, you know, I said, we're not, I said, A, the license doesn't allow us to do that. Okay, so the software is going to be available no matter what we do. But I said, secondly, I said the software is not primarily militarily. You know, it's not a primary military piece of software. Yes, it can be misused. It can be misused in a lot of ways. But my point is that we can't discriminate against individuals just upon where they happen to live. And that's going to be true whether it's India or China or Pakistan or North Korea or whatever. So I had to put out a blog entry about in April last year, because we're starting to get this. I really haven't heard anything else. And I'm so close to the Russians that if there was any issue, I would hear it. The worst thing I've heard is that the Russians were a little uncomfortable going to conferences because they felt people would argue with them at the conference. That is the only, but I asked for specifics and they said, no, nobody's ever done it. We're just conscious of that, and we're thinking maybe we better just stay in Russia. So I'm hoping to get them to come out and feel comfortable, and I'm hoping that individuals wouldn't feel like they had to yell at them in a conference, which I would think would be uncharacteristic of Postgres. But that's, I think, the farthest that's the worst thing that I've heard. So I'm pretty proud of how we have weathered this. Thank you. Another question. Maybe that was too big a question, huh? Anybody else? All right, well, I'm finished a minute early, so thank you very much. I do appreciate it. It's been an honor to speak to you today. Thank you.